The glass chandeliers of the Lexington Grand Hotel shimmered like frozen fireworks above a sea of black tuxedos and designer gowns. Champagne flutes clinked, cameras flashed, and the scent of expensive perfume mixed with the faint burn of caviar and ambition. It was one of those Manhattan nights where money didn't just talk, it glittered. In the corner of the grand hall, partially hidden behind a row of silver pillars, Imani Brooks pushed her cleaning cart as quietly as she could. Her gray uniform was neatly pressed, though 2 sizes too large, and her curly hair was tucked under a plain cap. To most people there, she was invisible, background movement to a night that was meant to shine. She'd worked at the Lexington Grand for almost 5 years, cleaning suites and ballrooms for the wealthy elite. She knew their habits, their favorite drinks, even the kinds of perfume that lingered in the air after their events. What they didn't know, what no one here knew, was that Imani had once dreamed of being one of them, not as a guest, but as a creator. Before her mother's illness, she had been a top student at the Fashion Institute of Technology. She used to sketch dresses on the back of her notebooks during night shifts at a diner, dreaming of the day her designs would walk the runway. But when her mother's health collapsed, her scholarship did too. Medical bills had replaced fabric swatches. Dream journals gave way to overtime schedules. Now she scrubbed the marble floors that people like her never got to walk in heels. She kept her head down as she worked, glancing occasionally at the crowd. The event was the Velasquez Foundation annual gala, hosted by Alejandro Velasquez, the Spanish billionaire who had turned a small textile company into a global fashion empire. He was 42, elegant, with salt and pepper hair and a voice that could fill a room. Imani had seen him before, not in person, but on TV. He had the kind of presence that made people lean forward when he spoke. Tonight, he was surrounded by investors, models, and journalists, all eager to be in his orbit. At the center of the hall, displayed on a raised platform beneath a glass case, stood the centerpiece of the evening, a deep emerald gown embroidered with silver threads that shimmered like water under light. It was designed by his company's top couture team and priced at nearly $1 million. The press was calling it the Green Siren. Imani paused to admire it for a moment. Every stitch was a reminder of what she once loved, the craft, the detail, the storytelling through fabric. For a second, she forgot where she was. Until the sound of laughter pulled her back. Alejandro Velasquez had turned toward the display, glass in hand, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "They say this dress was made for perfection," he said, his Spanish accent softening the edges of his English. "But I wonder who here could actually wear it and make it live." The guests chuckled politely. Alejandro's gaze swept the room like a performer waiting for applause. Then his eyes stopped on Imani. For a moment, she froze. She wasn't sure why he was looking at her. Maybe he was just scanning the room. But his smirk deepened. "Perhaps," he said, raising his glass slightly, "our hard-working staff should try. Who knows? Maybe even the cleaning lady could bring this masterpiece to life." The crowd laughed. The sound hit her like cold water. Imani stood still, unsure whether to move or disappear. Her hands tightened on the cart handle until her knuckles whitened. Someone nearby, a woman in a gold dress, tipsy and cruel, added, "Yes, darling, go on. Let's see if she can squeeze into it." More laughter. Camera flashes. Imani's throat tightened. She looked down, trying to stay professional. She'd been humiliated before, condescended to, ignored, but never like this. Never so publicly. Alejandro grinned, sipping his champagne, the charming host who thought he was being funny. "Don't take it personally," he said. "It's just a joke." Her voice came out small but steady. "A joke at whose expense, sir?" The laughter faltered slightly. Alejandro blinked, surprised she had spoken. "At no one's," he replied, still smiling. "We all need to laugh sometimes." Imani nodded slowly. "I'm sure you do." Then she turned her cart and walked away before her tears betrayed her. Behind her, the laughter resumed, uneasy at first, then louder, as if to erase the discomfort. Someone pulled out a phone. Post that, she heard a voice whisper. #gala humor. She pushed through the service door, the air inside suddenly cold and metallic. The hallway lights flickered. She leaned against the wall, gripping the edge of her cart, trying to steady her breath. Her reflection stared back from the metal door, a tired woman in a gray uniform who had just been reduced to a joke. For a long moment, she didn't cry. She just stared. Then, slowly, the tears came, quiet, angry tears that burned. But under that pain, something else stirred, something she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't humiliation anymore. It was resolve. "I'll show you," she whispered. Her voice trembled, but the words didn't. That night, after her shift, she rode the subway home in silence. The city outside was still alive, neon lights, sirens, laughter spilling from bars. She sat with her head against the window, replaying the moment in her mind. The sound of their laughter. The flash of cameras. The look on Alejandro's face when she dared to answer him. By the time she reached her small apartment in the Bronx, the fatigue had settled deep in her bones. Her mother, Denise, was asleep on the couch, the television still on. The faint hum of the oxygen machine filled the room. Imani switched it off gently, covered her mother with a blanket, and sat by the small kitchen table. The table was covered with fabric scraps and an old sketchbook. She hadn't opened it in years. But that night, she did. She turned to the first page, a design she'd drawn at 19, inspired by her grandmother's Sunday dresses. Her fingers traced the lines. She thought about what Alejandro had said, maybe even the cleaning lady could bring it to life. And for the first time, she smiled, not bitterly, but with quiet clarity. "Maybe she could," she murmured. She opened her laptop, an old one with a cracked screen, and typed, "Alejandro Velasquez scandals." The search results filled the screen, headlines about his fashion empire, charity events, his ex-wife, his wealth. But buried under the glamour, she noticed smaller stories, labor disputes, whispers of unethical supply chains, a few anonymous claims of workplace harassment. Nothing concrete, but enough to plant a seed. Imani saved everything she found in a folder. Then she opened another tab and searched, "How to start an independent fashion line." As the sun began to rise, she was still typing. She didn't know exactly what her plan was, not yet. But she knew this, she would not let him be the last person to define her. The next few days blurred into long shifts and restless nights. The video from the gala began circulating online. It wasn't long before she saw it, a short clip of Alejandro making the joke, the laughter, her walking away. The caption read, "Billionaire's playful moment goes viral." Playful. That was the word they used. She scrolled through the comments. "Poor woman. That was uncalled for. He's disgusting. I hope she's okay." Thousands of views. Then tens of thousands. Her stomach twisted, a mix of embarrassment and something like vindication. At least people could see what she had endured. At least now the world knew. A few online blogs picked up the story. One headline read, "The cleaning lady who stood up to a billionaire." By the end of the week, she received a message request on social media from someone named Lucia Torres. The name sounded familiar. When Imani clicked the profile, her eyes widened. Lucia had once been featured in a fashion magazine. She was a former designer for Velasquez Couture. "I saw what happened to you," the message said. "You were brave. He humiliated me once, too. Call me if you want to talk." Imani stared at the message for a long time. Then she dialed the number. Lucia's voice on the other end was calm but tired. "You handled it better than I did," she said. "I walked out crying that night." "What did he do?" Imani asked. Lucia sighed. "He took credit for my work. Told me no one would believe a woman like me designed his best-selling dress. I quit a month later." He's powerful, Imani. But power like his, it's built on silence. Imani listened quietly. Then she said, "Maybe it's time someone stopped being silent." Lucia hesitated. You're planning something? Not yet, Imani said softly. But I will. That night, as she stitched a patch on her mother's old robe, she thought about Lucia's words. Power built on silence. And she made herself a promise. If they thought the cleaning lady didn't belong, she would show them what belonging looked like, not by begging for it, but by building it herself. Days turned into weeks. The video continued to spread, and public opinion began to shift. Journalists started digging. New voices emerged, former employees, models, assistants, all with quiet stories about Alejandro Velasquez. Stories that sounded too similar to be coincidence. Meanwhile, Imani began training. Not in a gym, but in her life. She woke at 5 a.m. to sketch. After her shift, she sewed. She took online business courses at night. She stopped waiting for someone to give her a chance and decided to create her own. Every needle stitch became a small rebellion. Every sketch, an act of defiance. One evening, Lucia called again. There's going to be another gala, she said. Velasquez's company is sponsoring a charity auction at the plaza. He'll be there. Imani didn't answer immediately. She looked at the emerald dress design she'd been working on, inspired by the green siren, but her own. Then that's where I'll be, she said quietly. Not as a cleaner this time. Lucia hesitated. What are you planning? Something simple, Imani replied. To remind him that every person he steps on has a name and a story. Sometimes, humiliation isn't the end. It's the beginning of awareness. When life strips you of dignity in front of others, you're faced with a choice, to stay broken, or to rebuild yourself so completely that the world must look at you differently. Imani didn't know it yet, but that night at the Lexington Grand had just rewritten the story of her life. Because when you've been invisible long enough, the first time you decide to be seen, truly seen, the world has no idea how to handle it. And that's when change begins. Sound of rain against the window was the only rhythm in Imani's small apartment that night. It was steady, calm, like the quiet before a storm that no one saw coming. Her mother was asleep again, the soft hum of the oxygen machine blending with the city sounds outside. Imani sat at the table, staring at the glow of her laptop. Her eyes were tired, but her mind was awake. Too awake. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that ballroom, that laughter, the flash of champagne glasses in hands that would never know struggle. The internet hadn't forgotten either. The video had passed 1 million views now. People she didn't know were sending her messages, some kind, others cruel. Most just wanted a story. To them, she was a symbol, the cleaning lady who talked back to the billionaire. But to Imani, she was still the same woman who had to wake up at dawn and take the subway with bleach-stained shoes. She didn't feel powerful. She just felt unfinished. Lucia called again the next morning. There's more you should know, she said. Her voice was low, urgent. Alejandro didn't just humiliate women in public. He silenced them in private. Some took settlements. Others just disappeared from the industry. But there's something bigger. I can't talk on the phone. Can you meet me? They met in a small cafe in Brooklyn, the kind of place that smelled like roasted coffee beans and hope. Lucia wore sunglasses and kept checking the door. He owns too much, she whispered. He controls suppliers, journalists, even some local politicians. But his biggest secret isn't about fashion. It's about people. Imani leaned in. What do you mean? Lucia pulled out a small USB drive and set it on the table. Everything's on here. Financial documents, emails, things I copied before I left the company. I've been scared to use them. But maybe you're not. Imani looked at the drive as if it might burn her hand. She wasn't an investigator or a journalist. She was a cleaner, a daughter trying to survive. But survival had already taken everything from her, her education, her peace, her pride. Maybe this was her turn to take something back. She took the drive. If this gets me fired. Lucia interrupted softly. Then you'll build something better. That night, Imani went through the files. There were invoices, secret payments, messages between executives about labor violations, charity funds that had never reached their destinations. She found documents showing workers from overseas factories underpaid and silenced. She found digital signatures that could ruin Alejandro Velasquez. Her heart pounded as she scrolled. The screen's light reflected in her eyes like a spark catching fire. "This is enough to destroy him," she whispered. But destruction wasn't what she wanted. Not yet. She wanted something deeper. Something that would make him see. The next morning, she began her second life. She still went to work, but now every task felt different. Each polished floor and folded napkin was a step toward something larger. She spent her breaks sketching again, not gowns for the elite, but pieces that represented survival, resilience, quiet power. She created a folder called the Unseen Collection. In the evenings, she trained with a purpose. Rita, the gym owner down the block, noticed. "You move different these days," Rita said, watching her on the treadmill. "What's the story?" Imani wiped sweat from her forehead. "Someone made me a joke in front of the world." Rita crossed her arms. "Then you make them remember your name instead." It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about transformation. Each day, Imani became stronger, leaner, sharper. The weight she lost wasn't just physical, it was emotional. The shame began to lift. The anger melted into discipline. Weeks passed. The city moved as if unaware that a quiet storm was forming in its heart. And then one afternoon, while Imani was cleaning the executive suite, she found something strange. A guest had checked out suddenly, and among the papers left on the desk was a file stamped with the Velasquez Company logo. She wasn't supposed to look. But something made her pause. Inside were notes about an upcoming charity auction, the Plaza Gala that Lucia had mentioned. Alejandro Velasquez himself would be presenting the final piece of the night, the green siren. The same dress that had started everything. A handwritten line caught her eye. "All proceeds to be donated to the Foundation for Women in the Arts." The irony stung like salt on a wound. The same man who mocked her would stand on stage claiming to empower women. Imani felt a chill run through her spine. That night, she made a decision. She would go to that event, not as a guest, not as a worker, but as herself. Lucia helped her plan. They worked in secret, using every contact Lucia still had. One of her friends, a stylist, owed her a favor. He agreed to lend Imani a dress, not borrowed luxury, but one she had designed herself years ago and never had the courage to wear. It was simple, black satin with subtle embroidery shaped like wings. Freedom stitched in thread. As the date of the gala approached, Imani's nights grew shorter. Between work, sewing, and research, sleep became a stranger. But with every sunrise, she felt closer to reclaiming something she had lost long ago, her voice. The day before the gala, she visited her mother's care home. Denise was sitting by the window, looking out at the autumn trees. Her voice was weaker these days, but her eyes still held warmth. "You've been quiet lately," she said. "What's going on in that head of yours?" Imani smiled faintly. "I'm working on something, Mom." "Something big." Denise reached for her hand. "You always were my dreamer. Just promise me, don't lose yourself trying to prove your worth to people who never deserved you." Imani nodded, swallowing hard. "I just need to finish this. Then I can breathe again." On the night of the gala, she stood in front of her mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back. Her hair was styled simply, her makeup soft but confident. She looked elegant, yes, but more than that, she looked sure. The black dress fit perfectly, not because she had forced herself into it, but because she had grown into it. Her mother's bracelet glinted on her wrist, a quiet reminder of why she started this journey in the first place. When she arrived at the plaza, the crowd was already thick. Limousines lined the curb, photographers flashing their lights like gunfire. She walked past them unnoticed. The same invisibility that once humiliated her was now her armor. Inside, the air shimmered with perfume and performance. Waiters moved like clockwork, guests laughed too loudly. And there, near the stage, was Alejandro Velasquez, perfectly tailored suit, radiant smile, the same effortless confidence that had once crushed her. He didn't see her. Not yet. She found Lucia near the back of the room, seated at a table with a quiet view of the stage. "You ready?" Lucia asked. Imani nodded. More than ever. As the night went on, speeches were made, money was pledged, champagne flowed. The host announced the highlight of the evening, the auction for the green siren. Alejandro stepped onto the stage, his voice smooth as silk. "This dress," he said, gesturing to the display, "represents beauty, grace, and the spirit of womanhood. It's an honor to donate it tonight in support of women everywhere." The hypocrisy of his words made Imani's stomach twist. But she stayed still. Calm. Waiting. Then, as he finished his speech, she stood up. The sound of her chair scraping against the marble floor echoed louder than expected. Heads turned. Cameras followed. Alejandro's eyes found her, confusion flickering for a moment, then recognition. The room fell into a hush. Imani walked slowly toward the stage, her heels clicking like punctuation marks in the silence. When she reached the front, she looked up at him, not as a servant, not as a victim, but as a woman reclaiming her voice. "Do you remember me?" she asked softly. Alejandro blinked. His smile faltered. "Of course. The cleaning lady, yes?" The words sounded smaller now. "Hollow." Imani nodded. "That's right. The cleaning lady you made a joke of. The one you said should try on your perfect dress." A murmur spread through the crowd. Someone whispered, "It's her. The woman from the video." Alejandro's jaw tightened. "This isn't the place." "It's exactly the place," Imani interrupted. "You humiliated me in front of a crowd like this. You turned me into a punchline. So now I'm giving you the same stage, only this time, I brought the truth." Lucia stood up from her seat and held up her phone. The big screen behind the stage flickered. Then images began to appear, screenshots, documents, payments, messages from the files on the USB. Gasps spread like wildfire. Imani's voice was steady. "You claim to support women. But behind the cameras, behind your charities, you silence them. You underpay them. You use them. I was one of many, but I won't be silent anymore." Alejandro stepped back, pale. "Where did you get this?" "From those who stopped being afraid," she said. "You thought you could buy silence forever. But not this time." The crowd erupted, flashes, murmurs, the chaos of truth finally breaking its chains. Imani turned to the audience. "To every woman who has been told she doesn't belong, remember this, they only mock what they fear. And the moment you stand tall, their laughter dies." Applause began. It wasn't loud at first, but it grew, a wave rising, breaking. Alejandro stood frozen, his empire cracking in real time. Imani took a deep breath, her eyes glistening but steady. "You said I should try on your dress." "I did. But I didn't need to fit into your idea of beauty. I just needed to remember mine." The applause thundered now. Reporters were shouting questions. Alejandro's PR team rushed forward. But Imani didn't wait to see the aftermath. She turned and walked away, head high, the noise fading behind her like a distant storm. Outside, the city lights shimmered on the wet pavement. The rain had stopped. Imani lifted her face to the cool air and let out a breath she felt she'd been holding for years. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring, whether the video of that confrontation would go viral, whether Alejandro would fall. But she knew one thing for sure, she was done being invisible. And in that quiet certainty, she smiled. Because sometimes, the first step toward power isn't revenge. It's self-respect. The morning after the gala, the world moved differently. Newspapers, blogs, and television segments carried her face, a single image frozen mid-confrontation, her eyes calm while Alejandro's turned to disbelief. The cleaning lady who exposed a billionaire was the headline plastered across screens in Times Square. Imani sat on the edge of her bed, watching the news in silence. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing, reporters, activists, old classmates she hadn't heard from in years. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same society that laughed when she was humiliated was now cheering for her. But the attention didn't feel like victory. It felt like exposure. She turned off her phone. Her mother was watching from the other room, a quiet pride in her voice when she said, "You did something brave, baby." Imani nodded slowly. Yeah. But brave doesn't always mean safe. By noon, there were knocks at her door. Journalists, neighbors, even strangers offering to help. One of them slid a card under her door, the New York Herald. The note read, "We'd like to hear your side of the story, not just his." She folded it and put it away. She didn't want to tell a story. She wanted peace. Meanwhile, across town, Alejandro Velasquez was at war with silence. His boardroom was in chaos, lawyers arguing, assistants whispering, screens showing social media threads dissecting every rumor. Alejandro stood by the window overlooking Manhattan. His reflection stared back at him, tired and human for once. "Find out who leaked it," he said finally. His tone was calm, but the stillness in his eyes made everyone nervous. One of his advisors spoke up. "It's already out of our control. The files are everywhere, journalists, NGOs, even the Department of Labor is reviewing them. Sir, this could go federal." He said nothing for a moment. Then quietly, "Everyone has a weakness. Find hers." Imani returned to work 2 days later, pretending she didn't notice the way people looked at her. Some smiled, some whispered, some just avoided her altogether. The manager called her into the office. "You know you're on every platform right now," he said awkwardly. "Corporate doesn't like that kind of attention. I'm supposed to suspend you." She expected it. She nodded. "I understand." He hesitated. "For what it's worth. I'm proud of you." That night, she took the long way home. The city lights shimmered against puddles on the sidewalk. She passed a billboard showing Alejandro's company's logo being painted over. Things were shifting. Slowly, but visibly. Lucia called. "You okay?" "I lost my job," Imani said quietly. Lucia sighed. "You knew this would come with a price." "I did," Imani said. "I just didn't think it would feel so empty." "You burned down a palace," Lucia said gently. "It takes time to build something from the ashes." A week later, an email arrived from the New York Herald again. This time, it wasn't just an interview request. They wanted her to contribute a feature about the truth behind the glamour of the fashion industry, workers, underpaid artisans, cleaners like her. She stared at the message for a long time before replying with one line, "Let's talk." In the following weeks, Imani found herself sitting across from journalists, editors, and activists who wanted to hear her story. The process wasn't easy. Every word she spoke reopened old wounds, the humiliation, the exhaustion, the quiet sacrifices. But there was healing in honesty. Her piece went live under the title "Invisible Hands: The Women Who Keep Fashion Standing." It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. She wrote about the cleaners who never got credit, the seamstresses whose stitches held billion-dollar brands together. And though her own name was on the byline, she made sure the spotlight spread. It caught fire. Not as gossip, but as a movement. Brands faced pressure. Workers began to speak up. One night, she got a message request on Instagram from a user with no profile picture. It read, "You think you can destroy me?" She didn't need to guess who it was. She blocked the account. But 2 days later, when she was walking home, a black car slowed beside her. The tinted window rolled down, and Alejandro's voice cut through the city noise. "Get in." She froze. "You shouldn't be here." I just want to talk, he said. Imani crossed her arms. You had your stage. You used your voice then. He sighed, stepping out of the car. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes hollow. The man who once seemed untouchable now looked like someone who hadn't slept in weeks. You don't understand what you've started, he said. Maybe not, she replied. But I understand what you ended. He looked at her, something like pain flickering behind the arrogance. You think I built this empire alone? I have investors, partners, people who will destroy you to save themselves. Walk away now and maybe they'll forget your name. Imani held his gaze. I spent years being invisible. I'm not afraid of being forgotten. I'm afraid of going back to silence. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The noise of the city filled the space between them, sirens, distant laughter, life moving forward. Then Alejandro stepped closer, lowering his voice. You think truth matters to people like us? It's about control. And you're losing yours. She took a step back. You don't scare me anymore. He studied her, then gave a small, tired smile. You should be careful what kind of hero you become. The world doesn't love women who fight back. It loves to watch them fall. The words stayed with her long after he drove away. Not as a threat, but as a reminder of the world she was up against. The following month, Alejandro's company collapsed under investigation. Investors pulled out, journalists uncovered deeper scandals, and former employees came forward. His face vanished from magazine covers and reappeared in courtroom sketches. Imani watched it all unfold with mixed emotions. She should have felt vindicated, but instead, she felt heavy, like justice wasn't as clean as she'd imagined. Lucia met her for coffee one afternoon. You look like someone who just won and lost at the same time, she said. Imani stirred her cup. Maybe that's what justice is. Winning without feeling joy. Lucia nodded. Or maybe it's the start of something else. That night, Imani sat at her desk again, staring at her sketches. She realized she hadn't drawn in weeks. She took out her pencil and began to sketch, not gowns, not revenge, but a woman standing tall in the rain, head tilted upward, eyes closed. Underneath, she wrote one word, rebirth. Her phone buzzed. It was an email from a small fashion collective in Brooklyn, designers focused on sustainability and fair pay. They'd read her article and wanted to collaborate. We're calling it the Unseen Project, the message said. A line designed by workers, for workers. Are you in? For the first time in months, Imani smiled. I'm in, she whispered. The following weeks were filled with movement again, not the rushed exhaustion of survival, but the energy of creation. She sewed late into the night, her fingers remembering the rhythm they'd once forgotten. The studio smelled of fabric and dreams. Her mother visited once the first prototypes were finished. She ran her hand along a mannequin wearing a simple linen dress with hand-stitched patterns. This is beautiful, baby, she said softly. Imani smiled. It's ours. Every woman who was ever told she didn't belong, this is for her. Denise touched her daughter's cheek. You turned pain into purpose. That's what makes you powerful. And as Imani watched the sunset through the window that evening, she realized she didn't just expose a man. She had exposed a system, and in doing so, found a new way to build. The city outside was loud again, but this time it didn't drown her. It carried her. And for the first time since that night at the gala, she allowed herself to breathe without fear. 3 months passed before the world saw Alejandro Velasquez again. He appeared on a live-streamed interview, thinner, paler, his charm polished but distant. The screen in Imani's apartment glowed with his face as he spoke softly to the journalist. I made mistakes, he said. I let ambition blind me. I take full responsibility. Imani sat on the couch, watching, expression unreadable. The interviewer leaned in. Are you referring to the allegations from your former employees? Or to the public incident with Imani Brooks? Alejandro hesitated just long enough for the silence to sting. Both, he said finally. I've reached out privately to Ms. Brooks. I wish her peace. Imani scoffed under her breath. He hadn't reached out. Not once. It was all theater, the same manipulation that once made him a god in the boardroom. The next morning, her inbox was flooded again. Journalists wanted her reaction. A talk show offered her a segment to share her truth. Even brands that once ignored her now wanted partnerships. She closed her laptop and walked away from it all. She didn't want to become a face of scandal. She wanted to build. But fame has its own gravity. A week later, a non-profit invited her to speak at a women's leadership conference. Lucia urged her to go. You don't have to tell your whole story, Lucia said. Just let them see that strength looks like you. Imani agreed. The auditorium was bright and modern, filled with women from different industries, business, art, activism. When her name was announced, applause followed. It still felt surreal, hearing her name celebrated instead of whispered. She stepped on stage, took a breath, and began. When you're invisible long enough, you start to believe you don't exist. But invisibility can be power too, it lets you see what others hide. I used to think silence kept me safe. Now I know it just kept me small. The room was silent, listening. We live in a world that rewards arrogance and punishes honesty. But I learned something the hard way: dignity is louder than revenge. She ended to a standing ovation. Cameras flashed. She smiled, but as she stepped backstage, she felt the weight of all those eyes again. Admiration could turn to expectation, and expectation could crush. That night, scrolling through the comments on her speech, she saw people debating her every word. Some called her a hero. Others accused her of exploiting the moment. The same crowd that had mocked her was now dissecting her like a symbol. She put her phone down. She wasn't built for this kind of fame. A few days later, she received an unexpected invitation, a private request from Alejandro's legal team. He wanted to meet. No press, no cameras. Just a conversation. Lucia was against it. You owe him nothing, she said. I know, Imani replied. But sometimes closure isn't about them. It's about us. The meeting was arranged in a quiet restaurant downtown after hours. The lights were low, the city humming outside. Alejandro was already there when she arrived, seated at a table with 2 untouched glasses of water. He stood as she approached. You look well, he said. I am, she replied, sitting across from him. Can we skip the small talk? He smiled faintly, the same disarming expression he'd once used on investors and journalists alike. I suppose we can. You changed everything, you know. The company's gone. My name, my legacy, ruined. Imani studied him. You did that yourself. He nodded. Maybe. But you lit the match. Would you rather I'd stayed quiet? He leaned back, exhaling. I don't know. Maybe silence was better for both of us. Silence, she said, her tone sharpening, was killing people. Women losing their jobs, workers being abused. Your silence bought your empire. For the first time, his composure cracked. Do you think I started out that way? I came from nothing too. I built it all, and somewhere along the way, I started believing the world owed me. Imani looked at him, not with anger this time, but something closer to understanding. You wanted control. You thought that made you untouchable. But control's just fear in disguise. He stared at her. You sound like someone who's won. I'm not sure anyone wins, she said quietly. Not when the price is this high. They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, a cab honked. Someone laughed in the distance. Alejandro's voice softened. I'm leaving New York. There's nothing left for me here. I came tonight to say, thank you. She frowned. For what? For reminding me I'm human. Imani didn't answer. When she finally stood to leave, she looked at him one last time. Redemption isn't a press statement. It's what you do when no one's watching. I hope you figure that out. She walked out into the cold night, her breath visible against the city's glow. For the first time, she didn't feel small standing under skyscrapers. She felt aligned, not above anyone, not beneath anyone, just herself. Days turned into weeks again. The unseen project grew, slowly but surely. Orders came in from across the country. Women wrote letters saying how the story inspired them to quit jobs that undervalued them or start small businesses of their own. Imani spent more time at the studio than home. It became her sanctuary, fabrics draped over tables, late-night music humming through the speakers, Lucia laughing over coffee. Each new collection carried a message stitched quietly into the lining of every piece, made by hands that refused to disappear. Then one afternoon, while checking shipments, she received a letter. No return address. Inside was a single page. I've left New York. Starting over in Madrid. The foundation's assets have been liquidated and redistributed to workers' rights initiatives. Consider it a small attempt at redemption. AV. She read it twice. Folded it. Set it aside. She didn't know if it was real or another performance. But maybe, just maybe, it didn't matter. Some stories didn't need neat endings. Months later, the Unseen Project launched its first runway show, not in a luxury venue, but in an old converted warehouse in Brooklyn. The audience wasn't just celebrities and critics, but janitors, tailors, cleaners, seamstresses. People who'd spent their lives behind the scenes. When the lights dimmed and the first model stepped out, Imani stood backstage, heart pounding. Each piece told a story, raw fabric transformed into elegance, strength shaped from simplicity. Lucia squeezed her hand. You did it, she whispered. Imani smiled. We did. After the final walk, the applause came. It wasn't thunderous like the gala had been, it was softer, more genuine, the kind that fills the air with gratitude instead of ego. A journalist approached her afterward. You've gone from cleaner to designer, from viral scandal to inspiration. How does it feel? Imani thought for a moment before answering. It feels like coming home. I didn't climb a ladder. I just built my own. That night, as the guests drifted out and the warehouse lights dimmed, she walked alone across the runway. The wooden floor creaked under her steps. She stopped at the center, looking out at the empty chairs. In the silence, she felt something shift inside, the quiet end of a chapter she didn't even realize she was still holding on to. The humiliation that once defined her had become the soil for her purpose. And maybe that was the truest form of power, turning what broke you into something that heals. She looked up, whispering softly to herself, I'm still here. The city outside pulsed with life again. Not cruel this time. Just alive. 6 months after the show, life had settled into something gentle. The kind of quiet that used to scare Imani but now felt earned. Her mother's health had improved. The physical therapy, the medication, all of it had finally paid off. On warm days, they sat together in the small backyard behind their apartment, where Imani had planted a row of sunflowers. They bent slightly toward the light, golden and stubborn. You look tired, baby, her mother said one afternoon, voice raspy but affectionate. Imani smiled faintly. Good tired. The kind that comes from building something that matters. Her mother's eyes softened. You always were a builder. Even when you were little, fixing your dolls with duct tape and fabric scraps. Imani laughed quietly. Guess I never stopped. A breeze rustled through the sunflowers. Her mother's hand reached out, brushing Imani's. Do you still think about that night? The one where it all began? Imani hesitated. Sometimes. Not because it hurts. More because it reminds me who I used to be. And how easy it is to let other people define you if you're not careful. Her mother nodded. Pain's a good teacher. But don't enroll twice. That night, Imani couldn't sleep. She sat by her sewing table, surrounded by sketches, fabric swatches, and unfinished dresses. Her phone buzzed, a message from Lucia. "Check your email." She opened it. An invitation. The upcoming Global Fashion Ethics Awards had chosen the Unseen Project for their annual honor, Outstanding Social Impact in Design. For a long moment, she just stared at the screen. Then she laughed softly, tears stinging her eyes. The ceremony was held in a minimalist theater in Soho, far from the glitter of the Metropolitan, but somehow far grander. The audience wasn't full of billionaires or paparazzi, but of community leaders, small designers, journalists who cared about meaning over gossip. When Imani's name was called, she walked to the stage slowly, the spotlight steady and warm. She didn't wear luxury that night. Just a simple ivory gown she'd made herself, with thread dyed from sunflower petals. She looked out at the audience and took a breath. 2 years ago, she began, I was invisible. I cleaned rooms for people who never looked at me. I believed that if I stayed quiet, I'd be safe. But silence doesn't keep you safe, it keeps you stuck. And the world doesn't change when you stay comfortable. She paused. The room was silent. Someone once told me I wasn't made for certain spaces. That I didn't belong in certain dresses. What they didn't know was that I didn't need to fit into anything. I could create something new, something that fits all of us who were told we didn't measure up. A ripple of applause moved through the room, gentle and sincere. Imani's voice softened. To every woman watching this, if you've ever been humiliated, underestimated, or made to feel small, remember this: the people who laugh at you are just revealing what they fear most in themselves. Keep going anyway. Let your pain build you, not bury you. Applause grew louder, rising like a wave. Later that night, she found herself standing alone outside the theater, the cold air brushing against her skin. Reporters and lights were gone. The city had gone back to its rhythm. She looked up at the skyline, all glass and reflection, and smiled. Her mother's words echoed softly in her mind, "Pain's a good teacher. But don't enroll twice." She walked a few blocks in silence, passing the hotel where it all started. The lobby had changed, new marble floors, a new name. No one recognized her now. She could have walked in and no one would know that 2 years ago, she'd stood there shaking, clutching a cleaning cart while strangers laughed. She stood at the door for a long time, then smiled faintly and kept walking. Some places didn't deserve closure. At home, she poured herself tea and sat by the window. Across the street, the small community center that now hosted the Unseen Project's sewing workshops was still lit. Inside, a group of teenage girls laughed as they worked on fabric. One of them saw her through the window and waved shyly. Imani waved back, heart swelling. Those girls didn't see her as the woman from a viral video. They saw her as proof that you could start from anywhere and still build something real. Her phone buzzed again, a message from an unknown number. A single photo. Alejandro, standing outside what looked like a small shop in Madrid, surrounded by workers smiling for the camera. The shop sign read, Fundación Nueva Luz. Under it, 2 words, Gracias, Imani. She stared at it for a long time, the corners of her mouth lifting slightly. Maybe redemption really wasn't about undoing the past. Maybe it was about doing something better now. She put her phone down, took a sip of her tea, and opened her sketchbook. Her next collection would be called Roots. A reminder that even flowers that bloom in concrete come from somewhere deep, unseen, but unbreakable. As dawn began to rise over New York, soft gold light spilled across her sketches. She looked at them, designs born of pain, courage, and grace, and whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude. Not to forget, but to forgive. And maybe that was the true victory. Not the exposure. Not the revenge. But the peace of knowing she had turned her humiliation into humanity. Imani closed her sketchbook, took one last look out the window, and smiled. The city was waking up again. So was she. Because dignity, she had learned, isn't given. It's lived. Every single day.